Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali-Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Destiny O. Birdsong is an award-winning poet, novelist, and essayist whose work has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, African American Review, and Catapult, among other publications. Her debut poetry collection, Negotiations, was published in 2020 by Tin House, and her debut novel, Nobody's Magic, was published in 2022 from Grand Central Publishing. She is the inaugural 2022 Hurston Wright Foundation and Hachette Book Group Writer-in-Residence at Rutgers University. So let me just say that I had so much fun with you when I finally got to meet you in Philadelphia for AWP. And what was so funny, Destiny, is that before, I think I told you this, but before you came to set up at the Hurston Wright booth to sell copies of your new book, folks were looking for you, honest to God. So they were like, has Destiny come yet? And so I've been telling everyone since that, you know, Destiny's hot stuff, right? You call your books, I love it. You call your books your girls. And really, when we were at AWP, you sold out in less than an hour, all your books, right? And
yeah, I feel like it was maybe 90 minutes. It was a little longer.
Look at you. It was within the time that you were slotted to be at the booth. And so and it was fantastic because folks, you have such a rich engagement within this literary community. Folks love you. You are so gracious and loving to folks that you've encountered, however you've met them. And so I just really want to start with also because I recall mentioning to you, I had read a piece that you had done for a magazine about, it was so good, about the lessons that you learned from a woman who was your best friend. And it was just, it spoke of your history. And what it alerted me is that you didn't have like a really conventional entree into this literary, you know, and when I say conventional, you know, MFA, you knew all along you're going to be a writer and you did you had this really substantive life before you embarked, and that led you to where you are now. So can you tell me what were some of the early instances that led to this writing journey that you're on as a writer?
Goodness. Okay. I'm going to try to keep this really short. But you're right. It has been a circuitous journey. And I do have an MFA, but I was talking to one of my friends last night and he was like, oh, I didn't realize that there was such a gap between your MFA and your books. It was 10 years for me from the time I walked for my degree until the time I got the call about my first book. And so it was a, you know, I lived those 10 years and finished another degree and worked and did all kinds of things. But I would say that the first inkling for me that I wanted to be a writer, it came through poetry. So I was a 7th grader and I grew up in the 90s. I at the risk of dating myself, I was an adolescent and a teenager in the 1990s, and there was a cartoon that used to come on every day after school. It was Batman. It was the animated series. And there was one episode where he visits this island and it's kind of Dr. Moreau-esque. There are these like anthropomorphic beasts. And one of them was like a half panther, half man, and he was really bad. And so Batman's job was sort of to, you know, get him back onto the island and into the safety of his confinement. And throughout the episode, Bruce Wayne kept quoting a poem, which at the time I didn't know was William Blake's The Tiger. And the lines were, tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. And I watched that episode and then wrote my first poem like immediately after. And the feeling, Yeah. And the feeling I got when I wrote it, I would have been maybe like 11 at the time. It was so overwhelming, and I didn't have the words to articulate what it felt like at the time, and I still don't, to be honest with you. But there was something in me that knew like this was a thing that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. But I was also very practical. I grew up in a working class family, and so I went into college thinking, oh, I'll be a lawyer, and I'll maybe write poems in my free time. Um, I took a class on the US Constitution. It was the most boring class. I, oh my gosh, I hated that class so much. And that was the one semester I spent at a state school in Louisiana. And so I eventually transferred to Fisk, which is where I got my degree. And when I transferred, I knew, I was like, you just need to be honest about this, and you need to major in English. And so I thought, maybe I'll be a professor. And so I went through undergrad like that. But at the same time, I was reading all of these great writers and these great books. I ended up being an English and history double major. And one of the reasons I picked up the second major is because I had this history professor named Dr. James Quirin, and he was so good at what he did. And one of the things that he did was he would assign us novels alongside our textbooks and historical texts, because his belief was that you can't really understand the impact of history if you don't understand how it impacted the culture, right? The cultures of colonized people, the cultures of colonizers. So we were reading all of these really interesting books alongside his lectures and all of that stuff. And so even though I wasn't necessarily thinking I'm going to be a full-time writer when I'm done, I think I was being prepared for it. And so, I entered my PhD program, ended up taking a workshop and really loved it, and ended up pursuing my MFA and my PhD alongside each other. But I still wasn't like sold on the idea of like writing full time. Mm-hmm. So I got out of my programs and I got on the job market. I don't know that I was the most enthusiastic applicant, because there was something in me that just knew that the life that I wanted to live was going to be a bit more fluid. And, in 2019, around 2016, I said I wanted to get serious about finishing my poetry manuscript, because I had this MFA thesis that I thought would be my first book. That's not what happened at all. But, I got more serious about creative writing around 2016. And then in 2019, I lost my job, and I thought, well, let me just see what happens. And I lost it after the poetry collection got picked up, but I was still working on Nobody's Magic. And I really think that having those few months between losing my job and submitting the manuscripts to my agent, it really gave me time to hone the manuscript and make it strong. Mm-hmm. And my agent also gave notes. And so like having the free time to do that while I was completing the book was really important. And I'm super grateful for that. But it was a circuitous journey. I just think that I think the calling came to me early, maybe even before that moment of watching the cartoon, because I always loved reading. I loved writing. Those were my best subjects in elementary school. I was terrible at math, terrible at math. Not super invested in like my science courses, but loved reading, loved the library, loved the days where our teacher would read to us. We would have reading periods where she would read part of a book to us, and we would read like Ramona Quimby and Nothing's Fair in the 5th grade, and all of those like
Super Fudge, all of those,
and Fudge, Super Fudge,
right.
Tootsie.
Right. My teacher did Bridge to Terabithia too. I loved
I don't know if I've read that.
If I loved having the teacher read and get us started, and then you can just go and finish it on your own. Oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. I remember those days.
Yes. Those are my favorite moments. And it's interesting, I wasn't like a star pupil when I first started out. I don't know how magnet programs work now, but when I was growing up in Louisiana, there was a process, and you had to sort of get tested for it and admitted into the program. Mm-hmm. And I got admitted for kindergarten, and my kindergarten teacher told my mom, like, I don't think she's ready for the 1st grade. I think we need to sort of make her repeat kindergarten, and you need to take her out of this program and then bring her back. And my mom refused to do that. And first grade was also a little rough. But in the second grade, I had a teacher. She was a Black woman. Her name was Miss Gibbs, and she was from Mississippi. And that's where I started to love reading, because she loved reading. And so she would read to us. And like, that's where I found my place, you know, like as a student. And I started to excel because I had that outlet and I had those options in her class. And so, yeah, it may have been as early as that, but I think the seventh grade was sort of my first, like, that was like the moment where I made something, and the feeling of making it was so overwhelming that I knew I was going to do that for the rest of my life in some capacity.
That's so beautiful. It's so wonderful to hear writers speak on how important reading was, and how much of an impact that led to them wanting to be creators of the written word themselves. But when you began writing, did you have a mission statement, so to speak, or has that evolved? Have you evolved to have one? And when I ask about a mission statement, I'm asking, is there a purpose or a reason why you write? And that it's always, your writing is always aligned with this purpose or this mission.
I certainly try to. I don't have anything written down, and I probably should. I grew up in that kind of culture. You know, I grew up in like non-denominational Christian churches, and we always had a mission statement, and you would like repeat it at the beginning of service. And I don't have anything like that. I do have like a list of rules on my wall about my professional behavior, right? Like, you do the best work you can. You know, you make the path for yourself, you treat people with kindness, you know, so I have those things. But I think if I had to boil it down in terms of the work, you know, I feel like for me, like, writing is a calling. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the best at it, or that I'm the shiniest, or, you know, I'm supposed to be the most successful. But when I think about my faith practices, like, my job in my life is to be useful, you know, is to be useful to other people, and to try to make the world a better, safer, happier place to live in, not only for the people around me, but for the people who encounter my work. And so it feels to me, it's a spiritual practice. It feels very holy. It feels very important to me, even though there's a whole other business side of it, right? Where you're selling books, you're getting paid for things. Yes, I do need to live and eat and pay my bills and feed my dog and put gas in my car and all that stuff. But when I'm here at my desk with my work, that's spiritual. And that for me involves like listening to my instincts, and honing my instincts too, right? The more time I spend with my work, the better I am at discerning what the work needs. And the work has a mind and an agenda of its own. The work is smarter than me, I think. And so sometimes what listening to my instincts involves is stepping back from what I had in mind and letting the work become what it is, which is a thing that happened with Nobody's Magic. I wasn't planning to write this book. I didn't intend to write it. I was supposed to be working on something else.
Really?
And the book, yeah. Oh, yeah. This isn't my first fiction manuscript. So there was another manuscript that I was working on. I sent it to my agent. She said it wasn't ready. And so the summer that I started writing Nobody's Magic, I was supposed to be working on that manuscript, because she said she would look at it again.
Right.
And I didn't think, you know, I just kept having this idea for a short story. And I was like, you know, I'll get to that. But it kept coming back, and it kept like tapping me on the shoulder. And so finally I was like, okay, well, I'll just write like a one-off short story, and whatever happens, happens. And it turned into this book. And that's another thing I've learned about like my credo as a writer, is that if something is tapping you on the shoulder, if something is talking to you, give it space, you know, because you never know what it could be. I never imagined that I would write this particular book. It wasn't on my agenda at all. And I'm glad it wasn't, right? Because I went into it without a lot of intentions, you know. I did, you know, once a project starts to take shape, you as a writer are responsible for sort of ushering that shape into being. But and that happened with this book. But there's so many things about this book that I didn't anticipate doing. I didn't anticipate writing, but I let the work speak to me. And that's part of my practice as well. So
can you tell us a little bit about Nobody's Magic? Well,
yeah, sure.
Tell us about it. And I'm really I really want to know what elements were tapping you on the shoulder that were urging you to birth them. Tell us a little bit about the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, well, shameless plug. First of all, here is
That's
the book.
right.
She's
That's one of your
beautiful.
girls.
Yes, this is my girl. So yeah, so Nobody's Magic started with a joke. I was on the phone with one of my friends, and I was out of state at the time doing grading for high school advanced placement exams. And I just said a joke on the phone during one of my breaks. I was like, oh my gosh, it would be so cool if somebody just like lost it in here. Cause it's such an austere space. It's very quiet. There are times I don't even think we could use it. I had to walk out to use my phone. Even during breaks, you couldn't use your phone at the desk. There are a lot of rules. It's very silent, and necessarily so.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, oh gosh, it'd be wild if someone just, started throwing stuff or lost their cool in here. And I think I was walking back to my hotel room after a day of work, and the first lines of Mind the Prompt, which is the third part of the triptych, came to me, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. That'd be kind of cool. And those lines kept coming back. Right. Because I was there, the week that you spend there grading is really intense. You work from 8 to 5, you have breaks and you have lunch, but you're there in the conference center, usually from 8 to 5.
Wow.
And then you have dinner, and sometimes there are evening events, or there are little clubs that people will form. And you might do that stuff. But that year, I was also editing someone's dissertation. So I would eat dinner, go back to my room, and then work on that. So I didn't have time. So while I was there, I just, the lines were coming, and I was like, that's really cool, whatever. But I didn't have time to work on it anyway. And it wasn't until I got back home, and it was still really persistent, that I was like, okay, and I finished the editing for the dissertation. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll just write a short story. So it started off as a short story. I'm a long-winded writer. I know that. I'm proud of that. If you read a word I've written, it is on the page because I intended it to be there. I don't write just to fill space, but I am long-winded, and so the story came out a little long. And I was showing it to people, and they were like, "This could be longer. We want to know what happens after this ending." And so I wrote past the ending, and it turned into a novella. And I had a couple of other ideas about these other characters that I thought were really interesting, and so I started kind of working on them as well. And those stories also came out long, but I noticed that they were talking to each other, right? So all of the characters are Black women with albinism. They either live in or have connections to my hometown. All of them are sort of at a crossroads, right? Where they're having to figure out, how do I live past this particular moment, right? And the moments are different for each of the women. And, I fell in love with the characters as I was writing them. I wanted to spend time with them. My first books were written when nobody was looking for books for me, or at least they weren't looking for the books I was writing. Right. So I got to spend as much time with them as I wanted. I got to have fun with them. I got to experiment with them. And really what kept driving me back to the page was my interest in these women, and I enjoyed writing about them. I enjoyed spending time with them. And that's really important for me because, not everybody's going to love your work. Right. And the thing that I constantly remind myself of is I wrote this book because I wanted to. Mm-hmm. I didn't write it for people's approval. I really didn't necessarily write it to advance my career, right. At least not in that sort of really tangible monetary sense. Right. I wrote this book because I loved writing this book. Yeah. Right. And I was writing it for free. Nobody was paying me to do it. I had to take charge of my schedule and carve out time to do it. Mm-hmm. It was a labor of love.
Right. And we speak with such love for your characters, for your craft. Even when, like I said earlier, I love when you refer to your books as your girls, and, mm-hmm. they're like these entities, and you have such care and compassion and love for your own art. And so I can only imagine how compelling the worlds are in your head as you craft them before you even let them out onto the page. You just were probably such a happy and content person, just even with your own imagination. So, when you see how folks respond to your work, because your work now is something that many people are familiar with. And, you know, as I spoke earlier to how folks just are so eager to just be in the same space with you, they also happily embrace your work. Has there been any feedback on your work from an unexpected space or person that you just never could have imagined has happened to you? And I'd love to hear what that experience was like.
Yeah, so the one that comes to mind is Tondo Hopa, who is a model. She's a South African woman. She's a Black woman with albinism. And she reached out to me kind of like during the buzz around the publication date. And she basically said, I can't quote exactly what she said, but she's basically like, you know, the way that this book is being presented to the world feels caring and authentic, and you know, and that meant a lot to me, because I don't, I'm not in the business of selling subjectivity. You know what I mean? Like, I do think that my book is innovative. I do think it's doing something that not many books have done to date. But that's because I wanted to see myself in print. I wanted to see myself in a book, and I hadn't before. And so part of my love for these characters and part of my love for the work of writing this book is that I got to spend time with characters who were like me,
Right.
you know? And I haven't always had the privilege of doing that.
Right.
And so I appreciated the fact that the way that me and my press presented these characters to the world felt safe for another person who shares my subjectivity. You know, I can't speak for everybody with albinism who's read the book. They might not like all of the characters. The first character that I talked to you about, Agnes, is pretty unlikable. I did that intentionally because I think that the cultural work of humanizing a particular subjectivity is something that's been a part of African American literature since the narratives of enslaved people. That was work that they actually had to do, right? If you look at a lot of those narratives, they have prefaces by white people who basically say, you can believe this person. They're morally, you know, they're morally intact, they're hardworking, they're a good person. And so much of that work was about justifying the personhood of the person who was telling the story. And I think that's important work. But I don't feel like I should have to do that in 2022, you know? You know, and so I wanted characters who were messy and complicated, but that you could still, in the end, want something good for, right? That's the cultural work that matters for me, because I'm not gonna be perfect, you know, but I still deserve things. I deserve to be safe in my home. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to live a life that's defined by my own goals and ambitions. And that's what I wanted this book to do. And so it meant a lot to hear from her about the way that the book was being, shown to the world. Yeah.
I love that. And it's so interesting because I think that you have expanded unintentionally to address my question around a mission statement, and you really have articulated what goes into and I love this, because what you're speaking about is the fact that there's dimension among us as Black people, that all of us, you know, and it doesn't romanticize the fact that, you know, Blackness isn't romanticized or even put on a pedestal where, you know, there's no sense of dimension and spectrum. So I would love to know, you've done poetry now, you've done fiction. Are we gonna possibly get another genre from you, memoir, or I wouldn't be surprised if folks are already talking to you about translating your book into film. Do you see anything else on the horizon, or is it too soon to tell in terms of other genres?
Well, a part of my mission statement as a writer is that everything is possible. Everything is possible. You know, again, in 2009, when I walked across the stage and got my MFA, I thought that I would write poetry mostly, you know, in terms of my creative work. And I would probably do literary criticism, because I was in a PhD program. And I thought that, you know, that would sort of be my the way I sustained myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm so grateful that over the past 13 years that vision has expanded.
Mm-hmm.
And it expanded because I let it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because I was open to trying new things. And so I'm still open to that. Everything's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Anything is possible. And if it's words on a page, I'm here for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is my life's work.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have to learn how to be a screenwriter, so be it. Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
That's
So yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
That's wonderful. So you know, I could talk to you forever. I am actually looking very forward to spending more time with you this
Yeah.
summer, when you work with us with Hurston Wright
Yeah.
as an instructor. I'm so pleased that you have been selected. And this was before I came on in December as one of our inaugural writers in residence. And you're going to
Mm.
be at Rutgers, teaching during our Writers Week there, but then
Mhm.
have 4 weeks there to work on new work. I'm not going to get in your business right now to see if you know what you're going to be writing on, because
That's okay, because I don't know.
right. That's what I was going to say.
I
It could
can't
be
tell you.
anything, because I love
It
how
really
you're just
could.
open to energy and whatever is tapping you on the shoulder. I love that. But just having folks have the opportunity to work with you just is so exciting. And I want to know if because you're teaching a multi-genre workshop. I'm wondering if there's one thing that in particular that you want to make sure. I know you can't say what your interactions are going to be like because it's really dependent on who's going to be in this space with you. But if there's
Mhm.
one thing, regardless of who's in the space with you, that you want to resonate and share with your students, what would that be? As an instructor, what is it that you want your writing students to know, as they proceed into their writing journey?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think, yeah, that everything is possible. I think everything can be possible, if you want it to be. I think it's important to remember um, why you started writing, right? Like, I think a lot of that gets lost in the professional aspects of publishing. And I think it's really important for me to keep that space, to keep my writing space sacred and free of the contaminants of like my professional anxieties and my professional obligations and all of that stuff, which is just a part of it's a part of life. You're not going to get away from it. But I think for me, it's become increasingly important to preserve the sanctity of my writing space. And that's something that I also think is really important in workshops. A lot of people, particularly people of color who've been through MFA programs, have had deeply traumatic experiences in workshops. And one of the things that I try my hardest to do, and I hope I've been successful at it, I think I have been, is to make the workshop space also sacred. So it should be a safe space for all of us to bring work. I don't know about everybody else, but I am writing for my life. I'm also writing about my life. Some of it is traumatic, some of it is deeply painful. And I need that work to be critiqued and responded to in a space that feels safe for the work and safe for me. And so that the importance of that safety and sanctity go beyond my personal writing space, and they should go into the spaces where I'm interacting with other people. And I think that that's a responsibility that all of us as writers have. We have it as students, we have it as faculty members, we have it as mentors, we have it as peers. And I think that that's something that I definitely want to leave with them. I want to create that space for them and model what it should look like, and then give them the tools to be able to go out and reproduce those spaces, that safety in other spaces. So
Wow.
yeah. And
Wonderful.
rigor is, well, I just want to say really quickly that kindness and rigor are not mutually exclusive. And that's something that I think is also a myth that's perpetuated by MFA programs. You don't have to rip somebody's work apart in order
Yes.
to be rigorous.
Mhm.
And what I mean in that, I mean in terms of just sort of like, you know, just
Right.
trashing it, right?
Right.
But you can actively and astutely and critically engage with someone's work, right? And still maintain the safety of the workshop space. So
very well said. And I think that is just that is a word of guidance for all learning spaces, whether it's writing. I think of, I am heavily involved in the homeschooling, the Black homeschooling community, and that's something that comes up a lot, is this idea of rigor, and this idea of safety, and many people choosing to homeschool because of the safety, whether it's because of the over racialization that's happening in schools now with CRT or what have you. But you articulate it so cleanly and clearly in terms of the impact of sacredness in response to potential trauma, but also that you can still create safety, but still be critically attuned and give feedback in a way that helps build the craft. So very well said. And, I could talk to you forever, but, and it seems like both of us are talkers, so this will never end. So as we close out, I'm going to actually ask you to let the folks know where they can get your beautiful book, which I know everyone looks at the cover and thinks that that's you. And you have to tell them it's fiction, it's not a memoir, because that book is beautiful. Give a shout out to, I don't know if you know who the artist is, but that book is just so stunning to look at. But where can folks purchase it? And let us know the places you want us to go get it.
So definitely shout out to the artists who worked on this book. So Adekunle Adeleke, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, created the image of the woman. Tree Abraham at Grand Central helped do some of the finishing touches on the cover. I'm deeply grateful to them. I absolutely love the cover of this book. It stuns me every time I look at it. So I'm deeply grateful to them for creating a beautiful book that entices people to read it. It is a good book. It is worth the enticement, if I do say so myself. But it's sold just about everywhere. I like to highlight independent bookstores, and particularly the bookstores here in Nashville who have signed copies. So there's a great bookstore called The Bookshop that has signed copies of it. Parnassus Books here in Nashville has signed copies. I do think they both ship. So if you want like a signed copy, certainly reach out to them. Another bookstore that has been really instrumental in the success of this book is Kindred Stories in Houston, which was this bookstore that highlighted it on Good Morning America. I'm deeply grateful to them. They also have book plates. They don't have like pen to paper, but they have book plates with my signature. So that's a great place. But yeah, I think it's great to support independent bookstores. Independent bookstores have really been instrumental in the success of both of my books. So any indie spot where you see them is great. But also, it's at Barnes & Noble. They have also been really supportive. I deeply appreciate them. So wherever you can get it is fine. But I do like to highlight indie spots that don't always get they don't always get the same level of promotion as other places. So those are just a couple of the ones that are deeply important to me.
Well, wonderful. I'm glad you were able to give them a shout out. And your website is?
It's destinybirdsong.com. It's a little wonky right now. I'm working on it, but there's a contact form there. There's info about negotiations, which is my poetry collection. There's info there about Nobody's Magic. There are essays that I've written over the past couple of years are housed there, and also some poems. So I think it's a great resource to just kind of get a greater sense of what I do and how I do it. So yeah.
Yeah, ditto. I agree. I love your website. I love your beautiful book. And I love your beautiful energy and spirit, Destiny. And I'm looking forward to spending more time with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Black Writers Studio. And we look forward to having you come in again. Have a great rest of the day.
Okay, you too. And I too am excited about Rutgers. I think it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.